Today we are joined by Kate Amber and Dr. Rod Dubrow-Marshall. Kate holds a master's degree in the psychology of coercive control from the University of Salford, a postgraduate certification in executive leadership from the University of Pennsylvania in violence and abuse prevention, and an ADA advocacy certification from Equal Access Advocates. Ms. Amber founded End Coercive Control USA, or ACUSA, to help educate and transform the systems designed to assist persons harmed by coercive control, with the mission of empowering them to regain their dignity, autonomy, and freedom. ACUSA is a founding partner of the International Coercive Control Conference, where Ms. Amber served as chair of the governance committee and member of the steering, finance, and planning committees. Ms. Amber is an international speaker, consultant, trainer, writer, and expert witness on domestic abuse, extremist groups, and coercive control. Dr. Dubrow-Marshall is a professor of psychology and is a program leader in the MSc Psychology of Coercive Control and the Directorate of Psychology and Public Health, and is visiting fellow in the Criminal Justice Hub and Connected Lives Diverse Realities Research Group in the School of Health and Society at the University of Salford in the UK. Rod is a social psychologist who has been researching the psychology and ideology of undue influence in cults or extremist groups for over 20 years, and he has developed the totalistic identity theory as an evidence-based theory to explain and tackle ideological extremism and ideological-driven violence. He is also an active researcher in a variety of other areas, including organizational behavior and healthiness, the social psychology of identity and prejudice, and public policy and education. As a graduate member of the British Psychological Society, Rod is a member of the board of directors of the International Cultic Studies Association and is also chair of the ICSA Research Committee and Network and is co-editor of the International Journal of Cultic Studies since its inception in 2010. In 2006, he was awarded the Herbert L. Rosedale Award jointly with Dr. Paul Martin for their psychological research on undue influence. In 2010, Rod gave the Paul Martin Lecture at the ICSA Annual Conference. Rod co-founded the Re-Entry Therapy Information and Referral Network in the UK in 2004 with Dr. Linda Dubrow-Marshall, where he serves as the consultant in helping individuals and families who have been adversely affected by destructive or damaging cults and other high-demand or manipulative groups or relationships. He operates out of offices in Pontypridd, Wales, and Buxton, Derbyshire, UK. Rod has also served on more than a dozen governing boards of schools, colleges, and universities over the last 2 decades, and is currently a governor and director of the École Primary School in Derby, and is also a long-standing member of the board of the homelessness charity The Wallach, headquartered in Cardiff, Wales. In addition, he is a member of the board of directors of the Buxton International Festival and is chair of the board of the Preston Guild Linked charity in Lancashire, UK, which is fundraising for the Preston Guild Cultural Festival in 2032. Rod is also an experienced senior leader and manager in higher education, having served for 15 years in the roles of Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Derby, Pro Vice Chancellor at the University of Central Lancashire and Preston, and as Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences in the University of South Wales, and Dean of Applied Social Sciences and Humanities at Buckinghamshire New University. Thank you for joining us, and welcome, Kate and Rod.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PsychoSocial Quicksand Model, an investigation into the efficacy of the model for survivors of coercive control and professionals and implications for education and practice. My name is Kate Amber. I am the founder of End Coercive Control USA here in the United States. And I recently completed my master's degree at the University of Salford, where Roderick Dubrow-Marshall was my supervisor and assisted me with my research into the efficacy of this model. So welcome to the presentation, and welcome, Rod. Would you like to say something about yourself before we get started?
Thanks, Kate. And just very briefly, I'm the co-program leader along with Linda Dubrow-Marshall of the MSc Psychology of Coercive Control at the University of Salford in the UK. And I was really pleased to supervise your dissertation research, Kate, and congratulations again on your successful degree and on your dissertation research, because it's really fascinating, and really pleased to be part of this presentation today.
Thanks, Rod. Okay, well, I'm going to turn off my camera and I will get started on my portion of the presentation, and then Rod will complete our presentation before we take do the question and answer. So again, thank you all for coming to listen to this presentation. Today, Rod and I will be presenting my research conducted for my master's dissertation on the psychology of coercive control. I apologize in advance for moving quickly. There is a lot to cover. So I encourage you to write down your questions as we go. We should have plenty of time at the end to address any questions that you might have. So coercive control was codified in law in the UK, where coercive and controlling behaviors were defined and incorporated into Section 76, the domestic abuse section of the Serious Crime Act of 2015. This legislation presents domestic abuse as a pattern of behavior rather than the discrete incidents of physical violence, and it was hoped that by doing so, domestic abuse could be more effectively addressed, especially with regard to domestic abuse homicide. However, since systemic gaps in understanding, policy, and implementation have proven to make addressing these issues complex, and it's clear now that legislation is not going to be enough. The PsychoSocial Quicksand Model of Coercive Control, or the PSQM for short, was created to fill these gaps, these systemic gaps, for the major systems working with perpetrators and survivors. The PSQM utilizes alliteration, metaphor, and learning styles to facilitate ease and speed of comprehension for this nuanced and complex topic. The research study was conducted to test the validity and effectiveness of this model. Psychosocial quicksand is the metaphor for the psychological and social strategies used by coercive controllers to entrap victims in an increasingly terrifying experience that can be nearly impossible to escape, especially alone. Here's what one participant had to say about the model. As a victim of domestic violence and coercive control, I have felt marginalized by the very systems put in place meant to protect me and my daughter. So many women have experienced intimate partner violence and coercive control and have been left feeling invalidated and invisible. The psychosocial quicksand model is a brilliant educational tool that not only explains what victims of coercive control experience, but also how they are unsupported by the judicial system. The modules are informative yet easy to understand. As I went through them, I felt seen, and I felt like this was exactly what was needed to educate those systems in coercive control so that it would be more easily recognized. The PSQM is a brilliant tool, and I hope that in the future it will be a requirement for every police officer, judge, family relations counselor, and family law attorney. The PSQM was created by synthesizing research and theory from the past 70 years in the fields of sales, neuromagic, domestic abuse, cults, human trafficking, prisoners of war, and violent extremism. Included are works on brainwashing, undue influence, persuasion, sleights of mind, totalistic identity theory, and torture, as studied by Stark, Hassan, Lalich, Singer, Biderman, Dubrow-Marshall, Cialdini, Lifton, Macknick and Martinez-Conde, Brown, and others. From this research, the four doubles and Darvo were developed to simplify the many means by which a coercive controller might dominate and entrap their victim. Double binds, double standards, double speak, double vision, and Darvo represent tactics and strategies of coercive controllers, as well as the harmful negative impact of coercive control on victims. The newest doublethink, was added after the research was conducted. The PSQM discusses the causes of coercive control as patriarchy, misogyny, hierarchies in general, sexism, supremacy, and oppression, and illustrates them using graphic images created to provide the learner with an immersive experience of coercive control from the perspective of the victim survivor. The mixed methods investigation into the model included qualitative interviews and quantitative data collected via before and after questionnaires. Rod will discuss the quantitative data shortly, but first, I'll review the qualitative. So 451 participants were recruited online, and 59 of them completed the entire study. In the Q&A at the end, we can discuss possible explanations for these numbers. Participants are a mixture of survivors of intimate partner violence, survivors of cults, survivors of both intimate partner violence and cults, and professionals in the field, for a total of 7 different categories. Participants watched a series of 7 10 to 15-minute training videos on the PSQM, and 13 people opted in to being interviewed. Survivors were asked one set of questions and professionals another. Participants who were both answered both sets. So here we have how the interviewee participants broke down. The interviewees broke down as 2 professionals who were not survivors. That's the pro group. So participant 1 and participant 4 were professional only. 1 pro who was also the survivor of a cult. 1 professional who survived intimate partner violence, and 2 professionals who were survivors of both intimate partner violence and a cult. The survivor-only groups included 3 people who were intimate partner survivors, 2 who were cult survivors, and 2 survivors that included intimate partner violence and a cult. So here are the questions that were used for the interviews. And these are the questions that were presented for the survivors in their interviews. And the first 6 are in sort of a burgundy-ish color. I don't know what color to call that. So that you can see that those 6 questions were used for both the survivors and for the professionals. So the survivor questions included, what did you like best overall about the PSQM? What did you like least overall? And then what did you like most about the images and least about the images? And then number 5 was, what recommendations would you make for improving the PSQM? And 6, were there any aspects of coercive control that you felt were missing from the model? And then the remaining questions were asked only to the survivors. So number 7 is, did you feel validated by the PSQM? Number 8 is, did you feel empowered? Number 9, which videos did you find most validating or empowering? And number 10, did the PSQM inspire you to want to do something to solve the problems in our systems? And if so, please elaborate. And then the professionals answered those first 6 questions the same as the survivors, but they had these additional questions. Number 7, did you feel that the information in the videos was appropriately presented to you and to your level of knowledge and expertise? This question was designed to establish whether these professionals felt like I was addressing them in a respectful manner. Number 8 was, did the videos make you feel blamed in any way for the problems in the system? As a survivor who has seen a lot of professionals respond poorly to me, I wanted to make sure that the training videos did not make the professionals feel blamed, because I wanted them to be able to be open to the model and the things that they could learn from it. Number 9, did you learn anything that you think would be valuable to your profession watching the videos? 10, what can you recommend including in the training in order to inspire other professionals to be motivated to implement positive systemic changes? And number 11, what recommendations would you make for improving the videos? So with those questions in mind from the interviews, I conducted a thematic analysis to establish the primary themes and sub-themes. And I won't go into detail here about the steps of the process I used to analyze the interviews, but I'm happy to answer any questions about my process for the thematic analysis at the end of the presentation in our question and answer period. So 2 overarching meta themes emerged from the qualitative interview analysis: the PSQM and the story meta themes. The PSQM meta theme and themes flowed directly from the research questions, the ones that I just showed you about the model. They include PSQM improve, the positive aspects of PSQM, and the benefits of PSQM. These themes align nicely with the questions set out by the research objectives. Although I didn't specifically ask for the interviewees to share their personal experiences, the story meta theme was prevalent in every interview and indicates that the model may be beneficial to survivors, as it appears to have elicited a lot of memories and provided opportunities to process and better understand their experiences of coercive control. So hopefully the survivors that participated in the research felt that it was a good experience for helping them process their emotions from these experiences. Because the PSQM meta theme was central to my research questions and objectives, while the story meta theme was not, I didn't analyze the story theme to the same extent. However, the experiences shared by the interviewees in the story meta theme include a wealth of valuable information about coercive control and are especially insightful as to why addressing it within our systems is proving to be so challenging. And then you'll notice that there's one hybrid theme on the screen, which is the hybrid theme of coercive control was identified across both the PSQM meta theme and the story meta theme. There are way too many themes and sub-themes to discuss in detail, but I've listed all the themes and sub-themes for each meta theme that I've selected, and I've selected a few quotes to illustrate some of the most important sub-themes as I see it. 3 of the sub-themes for PSQM improve relate to accessibility. They are the accessibility, the honey v. flypaper, and the KISS theme. Honey v. flypaper was present in comments suggesting the use of positive approaches when training professionals, and was named because you can, quote, catch more flies with honey than you can with flypaper. KISS stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid, and refers to the importance of clarity and simplicity in the training. And the 4th theme covered the importance of using a comprehensive lens when training on coercive control. This theme arose as critical for providing adequate context and implementing effective solutions to reducing coercive control. So here we have a quote that illustrates the need for more professional and lifelike images, which was pointed out by several of the interviewees. This is participant number 8, who was an intimate partner violence survivor. I like the more detailed type of graphic, more human-like graphic. Towards the end, maybe I would have chosen real faces with real people. The point is to hit it home and make it powerful enough to say, that's validating. Here's another quote from the PSQM Improve theme. This is from the Honey v. Flypaper theme. And this is participant number 4, who was a professional, but not a survivor. When I do training with police cadets, at the very least, the things that work with them are that it has to be very interactive and very engaging and examples. So when you had the slide about Gabby Petito's case, So it would be like exploding that even more, showing actual footage. A lot of learners need it to be engaging. Comments like this make it much easier for me to go back through my training videos and to improve the methods that I use for training. And I found these comments to be extremely valuable. So on to the second PSQM theme, which was the PSQM positive theme. It includes all 4 of the same sub-themes from the improve with an additional theme called powerful model and metaphor. So here's a quote. P1 is a professional, and this is on the, again, on the honey versus flypaper theme. Things are very well done and very appropriate. I'm thinking the professional who's just starting would benefit from looking at those videos. They're very clear and easy to understand, and yet you're not talking down to people or assuming they're idiots. You know, you do a really good job. P5 is a survivor of intimate partner violence and a cult. And P5's comments on the PSQM positive theme with the sub-theme of comprehensive coercive control lens said, when you're going through something like this, you're incredibly incapacitated. You know you can't speak up for yourself. You need somebody else to do it for you, and things don't make sense, and you can't express yourself clearly. And they just use that as more ammunition against you. See, she can't remember stuff. She's incoherent. She's inconsistent. She must be lying. This survivor describes how debilitating psychosocial quicksand can be and how desperately victims need systems to respond without blaming them. The many benefits of the model broke down into 3 sub-themes that centered survivors. The center survivors validate, center survivors empowers, and center survivors healing. Also broke down into 3 sub-themes for addressing coercive control through inspired actions and solutions, through inspiring collaboration, and by raising coercive control awareness. This quote by participant 9 includes some themes from both the PSQM positive theme and benefits theme. So for the positive theme, we have the sub-theme of powerful model and metaphor. And for the benefits theme is the sub-theme of centers, survivors, and empowers them. P9 is a cult survivor and says, the double bind one, that was the one for me where I was like, oh, this is describing exactly how, no matter what, you can't win. Like, I remember just getting to the place where, oh, I'm losing no matter what I do. And that was actually really empowering, because I remember thinking, oh, if I'm going to lose either way, then I might as well get out, right? Participant number 6 discusses the importance of the 3 survivor-centered sub-themes of empowerment, validation, and healing. And participant 6 is an IPV and cult survivor. So yeah, the validation and the empowerment, or let's say like this, understanding also makes me like, you know, is part of the psychoeducation. And getting like, yeah, getting educated on those things empowers me to be like responsible. It's like, okay, now I know. Now I can watch out for it. The coercive control hybrid theme was found across both the meta theme and the PSQM, the meta themes of PSQM and story. It includes your comprehensive coercive control lens, the fact that coercive control is invisible, that it's purposeful, that coercive control harms. It does so through trauma coerced attachment and cognitive dissonance. And everyone is vulnerable to coercive control, and then the importance of addressing coercive control in the systems, because a coercive control as a systemic issue was a repeating theme throughout all of the interviews. So here are some quotes on the coercive control crossover theme. So P1, a professional, comments on the new lens of coercive control and says, it cuts a clean space that people can look at things freshly without bringing a lot of baggage with them. And I think that's one of the great benefits of using that term. This particular person was referring to the fact that oftentimes terms like brainwashing are used, and that he preferred the coercive control term to a term like brainwashing. Participant number 7, a cult survivor, describes how coercive control is intentional. They said she would smooth things over so nice, they didn't suspect anything. So it was intentional, and she was very good at trying to explain it away and cover it up and gaslight me. Participant 8, a survivor of intimate partner violence, tells of their experience of coercive control and psychosocial quicksand as being invisible. They say because in the beginning, they don't come off pulling out a knife. In the beginning, of course, you sink into the quicksand very slowly. So when there's time, I plan to analyze the interviews in more depth for the story theme because of the wealth of insights that were presented within them. But here are a few examples of the story meta theme, beginning with the victim theme and sub-themes. So the sub-themes of the victim theme are trapped, referring to how victims are trapped by the psychosocial quicksand. Empowerment and solutions are needed. Victims are targeted and they are vulnerable. And then the importance of victims' strengths and focusing on victims' strengths in order to help heal and empower them. So in this quote from a cult survivor, participant number 9 discusses the importance of focusing on victims' strengths when validating and empowering them, and says, I'm getting better, yes. I think of empowerment as hope too. I think those things are connected. And so, yeah, I think it's both, because it gives me a sense of like, oh, well, I could refer someone to those videos and be like, this is why. And of course, she was referring to the fact that that's why she responded the way that she had. The sub-themes of the coercive control theme include, the coercive controllers theme, not the coercive control theme. So coercive controllers, it became clear that it was important to address intervention and accountability. The strategy and tactics of coercive controllers predominated the themes, their characteristics and their personality, and then the concept of coercive controllers' intentionality, whether they felt coercive controllers were acting intentionally and consciously or not. So this is a quote by participant number 2, who is a survivor of intimate partner violence and a cult, as well as being a professional in the field. And they emphasized how important it is to not buy into the coercive controllers' manipulation and deceit. They say it's understanding manipulation. The whole world needs to know how to look for it, how to understand it, so that so they're not further victimized by people joining in, by colluding, by, jumping on the bandwagon. And then people are further victimized and abused because these people have believed the perpetrator in the first place. And here, participant number 9, a cult survivor, quotes Rachel Jen Hollander, who distinguishes between a true apology and the weaponization of forgiveness and apologies that are often used by coercive controllers. And says, truly sorry abusers do not use their apologies as an excuse to escape human justice or make demands of their victims. Truly sorry people acknowledge the harm they have done and the rightness of punishment. So on to the professionals theme within the story meta theme. We have these three sub-themes. Coercive control is invisible. We need a systemic coercive control lens. And then the idea that professionals are complicit and arrogant, which we came across again and again in these in the interviews, even with the professionals. This interview with participant number 6, P6 is an IPV and cult survivor, and explains how harmful professional arrogance and victim blaming is for the survivor trapped in psychosocial quicksand. They say there's a victim blaming and like snap out of it sort of thing. I'm in quicksand and you're telling me to snap out of it. I cannot. I literally cannot. If someone is not being affected by it or is even profiting from it, then yeah, they don't have any interest in seeing it the other way around. The systems themes, sub-themes include that systems are broken, they're failing victims, they are colluding and complicit, there are solutions that are needed desperately, and systemic coercive control, which is a term, the term I use for something that some other research call coercive violence. And this is where a coercive controller gets a victim involved with state agencies or parties who are working on behalf of the systems, and they subject them to violence through those systems. So this is participant number 12, who is an IPV survivor. And this is the systems theme with the sub-theme of systemic coercive control, or you could call that coercive violence. They say this is actually a sexual assault and intimate partner violence survivor. And she's describing the systemic coercive control she encountered when reporting her rape to a female officer who re-traumatized her and completely ignored the perpetrator's confession, a common systemic response. She says, she just tried to gaslight me. And I had the videos, and she was like, oh, I don't see what you're talking about. And I had to, so she made me go in there and rewind it to certain parts that she claims she never saw. And he admitted it. She still didn't believe me. The final theme of the story meta theme is children. And the sub-themes under the children theme are how they are failed by the system. There was a request for more information about children in the PSQM. There are benefits to the PSQM being used with children, and that coercive controllers weaponize children. So we have two quotes here. The first is from participant number 9, who is a cult survivor, who describes the nightmare of dealing with a coercive controller in family court, and says, so we have a real narcissistic guy to deal with. And we were, over the course of 10 years, we were in court 4 times with 4 different lawyers. The second time he was taking us to court again, claiming that we were unfit parents. And the second one is from P10, a cult and IPV survivor, as well as a professional, who makes it clear that coercive control is, as the PSQM teaches, systemic and harms children through ineffective responses. P10 says addressing the system, how the system fails and turns their backs on the victim. Yeah. And children involved, when children get used. So that's the end of our meta themes, themes, and sub-themes. So now I'm going to just go over some of the conclusions that were drawn from the research study. So first, as far as the validity and the effectiveness of the model, number one, survivors and professionals' reactions to the model were overwhelmingly positive. Number two, the intended outcomes of validation, education, motivation, and empowerment were strongly reflected in the meta themes, the themes, and the sub-themes. And number three, interviewees provided valuable insight on the PSQM model and potential improvements. The primary recommendations for improving the model was to make the images more realistic and professional. On the left is the image that I used in the research study. And on the right is the new version, which is being currently designed and which the images for my upcoming book will be based. Hopefully you feel like it's more realistic. And then we have the conclusions that were drawn from the story meta theme. In addition to the conclusions the analysis drew from the PSQM research questions, the spontaneous sharing by the interviewees of their experiences of coercive control provided the following insights for addressing coercive control more effectively. One, to dismantle the systemic coercive control that is enabling coercive controllers to avoid accountability. We need appropriate blaming and accountability for perpetrators. We need to center survivors' experiences and emphasize survivors' strengths. We need to raise awareness of coercive control, remove the roadblocks to survivor healing and empowerment, inspire collaboration and action for change, and we need more coercive control focused research across contexts. So Rod will now review and present the quantitative data from the research. Take it away, Rod.
Thank you, Kate. If you could move to slide 36, that would be great. Thank you. So what was really impressive about this research that Kate did for her MSc dissertation was the fact that this was really testing out this model, both through the interviews that Kate has just explained in terms of the themes that were found, but then also quantitatively. And I think it's really brave to do that with the model, to actually say, well, this is the model that I think might be effective for people, but let's actually put that to the test in terms of really asking that question, and particularly combining that analysis with regard to the qualitative and the quantitative allows us to get really that rounded picture of the kind of appreciation amongst the participants of the model, of the psychosocial quicksand model that was presented to them, which they watched over 7 videos, as Kate was explaining earlier. And then after each video, they were asked to rate the videos according to these overall 5 criteria on a scale of 1 to 9, low to high. And this was what they thought was the educational value of the video and the material that they had just seen. To what extent did they see this as empowering? To what extent was it validating of their experience? To what extent was it motivating? And then fifthly, as Kate discussed earlier, to what extent was it visually appropriate? And then there was also an open-ended question, which doesn't form part of the quantitative analysis, but just in terms of completeness, in terms of the video evaluation questions, what recommendations, if any, would you make to improve this? Because it's video 1, but it would be video 2 if it was video 2, and so on. So across those 5 questions, and then across the 7 videos, the following tests were undertaken. And an important thing just to note about this data, and I'll come back to this in a few slides' time, is that the scores were almost uniformly positively skewed. In other words, on that 1 to 9 scale, participants were tending to rate the videos very highly across the educational value, how empowering it made them feel, how validating it was, how motivating it was, and also how visually appropriate it was. So across all of those, there was that right skew. And of course, what that means in terms of the data is that that data becomes less reliable for statistical analysis that relies on the arithmetic mean as the measure of central tendency in a distribution of scores. And so the tried and tested approach, therefore, in data that is skewed in that way, whether it's right skewed, positive in this case, or negative skewed, is to use what we call in statistical analysis a non-parametric test. And so in this case, the Klosker-Wallis test was used across the different conditions, different groups, in this sense, being the different groups of participants. This is whether they were cult survivors, IPV survivors, both, whether they were also a professional and a survivor, and so on. And so Klosker-Wallis test is essentially a non-parametric analysis of variance test. And so across all of those 5 evaluation questions across the 7 videos, so there were a total of 35 possible outcomes. These were the ones that came out as statistically significant. Plus, there was also the total that could be added up across each of the set of 5 questions as well. So it actually came to more than 35. So the first thing to note is that there wasn't a huge amount of divergence. And that's actually, I think, a good thing for the model, because that suggests actually that, generally speaking, a lot of the time, whether people were survivors or professionals, whether they were both, whether they were survivors of IPV or of a cult or of both, wasn't making a huge difference in terms of the evaluation. But what we did find was that there were some occasions where there were significant differences overall in terms of the differences across the groups. So video 2 on the empowering question was statistically significant, as you can see. And then likewise, video 2 for the validating question was statistically significant. The significance level being less than 0.05 there. If we move to video 4 and question 1 about the educational value, that was also statistically significant in terms of difference across the conditions. Likewise, on video 6, the same question, number 1, about the educational value was also significant. And then, interestingly, also on video 7, question 1, highly significant in this particular case, there at 0.009. And then a couple of the other questions on video 7, the empowering question, statistically significant there. And also on question 3, to do with the validation, how validating it was, also highly statistically significant, 0.005. And then just one of the totals across the questions, 5 video evaluation questions, come out significant for video 7. So if you look across the piece at statistically significant differences across all of the groups, we're not seeing a huge number. However, with a test across this many groups, it's possible then to do post hoc analysis to see whether particular pairs of conditions were significant different from each other. And this is where an interesting pattern starts to emerge. Firstly, when comparing cult with IPV, the mean rank for cult is always lower than for IPV, and sometimes significantly so, or approaching statistical significance. That was the case on 4 video evaluations. So in other words, the score for cult is lower than the score for IPV. And then Survivor and Pro scored significantly higher than IPV on several of the videos for the evaluation specifically about whether it was empowering and motivating. So another pattern starting to emerge then. Likewise, Survivor and Pro also scoring significantly higher than cult on a number of the videos, again with regard to this time the educational value, to what extent it validates people's experience, and then also again the motivational quality of the video. So there's some interesting patterns starting to emerge there, where Survivor and Pro was scoring consistently higher across some of these measures than IPV and cult, but also when comparing cult with IPV, we're also seeing that cult was scoring lower than IPV in terms of the groups. So if we move to the next set of findings, at the same time, Survivor and Pro is not significantly higher than IPV and cult. So here we see that when you're comparing 2 combination groups, people that are survivors both of intimate partner violence and a cult, not significantly different in the way that they evaluate the videos compared to survivors and professionals, if you put those survivors together and the professionals. And then IPV and cult scoring significantly higher than cult on several videos for what educates and validates. And then similarly, IPV and cult scoring significantly higher than IPV on a few of the videos for what empowers, people find empowering, and also approaching significance with regard to a couple, with regard to how it educates, how educationally valuable it is. So overall, these post-hoc tests, even though the bulk don't show differences, those that do, we're able to detect a pattern. And with statistical analysis, it can be really interesting to look at a pattern, and certainly that can give you an inkling as to what you then might investigate further. And it does appear to be the case that participants with a combined experience may appreciate the model more, and in particular the combination of survivor and professional compared, say, to survivors of one type of experience. So in other words, that combination of being a survivor and a professional was, in that sense, meaning that the model felt more valuable, more empowering, more validating, more motivating than for survivors only of one experience, IPV or cult. And one interpretation of this is that it tends to add to a growing body of evidence that there is a benefit of survivors becoming professionals, because it suggests a deeper and stronger appreciation of the issues and concepts, an experience and professional work combination that would bring. And it also kind of goes back to the qualitative theme that Kate was talking about earlier, where on occasions where professionals don't have that survivor experience, how they can, through their lack of appreciation, empathy, and knowledge, contribute to victim blaming, contribute to a continued form of gaslighting for survivors, where they really are not being properly appreciated and understood. And so what we tend to find here is an ability to what we call triangulate between the different quantitative and qualitative findings. This is not the triangulation that politicians do when they say one thing to one group of people and one thing to another. This is the classic research triangulation, where you take some of your quantitative findings and compare it with your qualitative. So as with the qualitative analysis, the quantitative data shows a strong support for the model, with overall scores maintaining a high positive skew, as I've said, which indicates that most participants evaluated the model positively in the evaluations after the video. So when put to the test, both quantitatively and qualitatively, the feedback that was sought is generally very positive feedback, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Where significant differences existed between the groups, as I was just commenting on, scores across the questions and videos were positively skewed. And the themes, with a few exceptions, indicate that most participants found the model to be validating, empowering, inspiring, motivating, educational, and also visibly, visually appropriate, notwithstanding the fact that there were caveats to that. And of course, this is a summing up of the overall findings, whereas of course there are individual differences, as always, in the way in which any model or any form of educational material is going to be responded to. And therefore, what the scores between the groups and the thematic analysis indicate together, in terms of this triangulation of the quantitative and qualitative data, is heightened model utility for participants with varied experiences across the contexts, including in combination with professional experience. This suggesting that the more experience a person has of coercive control, the more they find the psychosocial quicksand model to be accurate and useful. The only video evaluation question that actually showed no significant or approaching significant difference between the groups in the quantitative analysis was the question about the visual appropriateness. And this aligned with interview suggestions where accessibility themes were the most prevalent, and answers regarding the images drew the most suggestions for improvement of the model. There does appear to be a trend again there between the quantitative and qualitative analysis. The main difference or addition, one could say, between the quantitative and qualitative data, though, does appear in the story meta-theme, themes and sub-themes that Kate was describing and explaining earlier on. Quantitative data was derived from the video evaluation questions directly, and that was relevant to the research questions on the utility of the psychosocial quicksand model. But the interviews were what allowed for more latitude to explore not only the model, but also the concepts and participants' experiences. And this is what, of course, led to the identification of that story theme. So when we compare the quantitative and qualitative findings, what comes through very strongly for me is the rich personal experience that was shared with the interviewer via the story meta-theme, and that this appears to have had an additional potential therapeutic effect. In other words, what comes across from the interviews that Kate was describing earlier is that in reaction to the model that was positively evaluated in most instances, participants then wanted to tell their story. They wanted to open up. They were made to feel not just empowered theoretically by saying, I think the videos are empowering, it also empowered them to tell their story. And this could be perhaps in part to the combination of the lived and professional experience of the researcher, knowing that who they were talking to was somebody who also would empathize with the experience that they had had. And several of the survivors also talked about how they had the harmful experiences of victim blaming and Dubrow, And indeed, some professionals also mentioned this form of re-traumatization as well. And so it may well be that having the opportunity to share their stories with a researcher who's also a fellow survivor and who understands and effectively contextualizes coercive control can therefore assist in the healing process. I just want to add here that what this suggests to me is the immense value in psychoeducation as a form of recovery. I like two other approaches, but I think that what this is indicating, and this is being picked up particularly from the qualitative analysis, but also allied with the quantitative results that are very positive in general for the model, is that those positive evaluations dovetail really well with that empowering of the survivors to then tell their story. People feel comfortable. They feel that they're in a safe space. They feel that they're going to be heard. And moreover, that the model is helping them to understand better the experience that they've had. It's not telling them what they've experienced, but it's allowing them to think about the nature of that lived experience. And that's, of course, the value of psychoeducation. And we've seen that in a number of different models, in a number of different contexts. And if I can just briefly say that I remember that it came through very powerfully in the research that I did with the late Paul Martin and Ron Burks and Linda Dubrow-Marshall around the Wellspring Retreat and Resource Centre, where the dedicated treatment program at Wellspring included a psychoeducational component. So it wasn't, in inverted commas, a regular therapeutic intervention, although regular therapeutic techniques were used. It also importantly contained that psychoeducational component. Now, in a sense, you know, like so many of us, I wish I could go in that time traveling contraption and go back to Wellspring. I would love nothing more than to talk to Paul again. But if I did, and if I could go back even further to a time before we did the research, I would say, well, let's ask the participants at Wellspring, you know, how they felt about telling their story, having had the psychoeducational components. And so this, for me, is where the research that Kate has done is really powerful, because it suggests, it's real evidence, I think, of the value of psychoeducation in helping people open up and speak again about their experiences. And this also, I think, reinforces what we know and what has been researched about the value of narrative and the value of metaphor in therapeutic encounters. And I'm reminded in particular of the work of Julian Jaynes, Jaynes, whose work around metaphor and how metaphor is a way of being able to people to get closer to their conscious experience. That what the psychosocial quicksand model is doing is creating some very vivid metaphors. I'm not just talking about the visual metaphor, but also the written aspects of the metaphor that's allowing people to think again about the experiences that they've had. And this also, I think, links nicely into the British Psychological Society's power, threat, meaning framework from 2018, Lucy Johnston and Mary Boyle and colleagues, who very much want us in counseling psychology, psychotherapy, to develop approaches that allow people to say, what has happened to me, rather than that very judgmental type of diagnostic approach, some of which was kind of commented upon in the interviews, where mental health professionals say to survivors, well, what's wrong with you is this, you know, in terms of a diagnosis. Instead, to understand how power is used against you, whether it's in intimate partner violence or in cults, to understand the threats that were faced. And this is where that metaphor of psychosocial quicksand is helping people to understand about that power, to understand about the threats, and also, I think, to understand about their threat responses as part of the power threat meaning framework. The threat responses being those kind of expected responses to threats, which is to become more guarded, to become anxious, or where you feel sucked into that quicksand and feel that you have nowhere to go, that you're trapped, cornered, unable to get out. And while going back through any story of experience, and I feel this myself as a survivor of cults, can be potentially re-traumatizing. I think where the psychosocial quicksand model helps and where psychoeducation helps generally is because it does empower people to think through about what was done to them and how they didn't react in a way that shows there's something wrong with them, but in a way that can be expected based on those threats. And that's where I think the quantitative and qualitative data comes together really well, because people were finding it, participants were finding it empowering and validating. And that comes across very much in the quantitative data. And then they were empowered to tell their stories. And that seemed to be helping them. And indeed, future research, some other data that was collected that hopefully we'll be able to present at a future conference, will look at what hopefully can be seen to be the efficacy of the model as well for survivors in terms of their mental health. Because again, what was found at Wellspring was that that treatment program was efficacious. And of course, what is hoped is that the psychosocial quicksand model likewise would be efficacious. But I think all the indications are that process of empowering that comes across so clearly and powerfully from the combination of the quantitative and qualitative analysis indicates that it is likely to be an effective model for survivors to move forward with their recovery. And further evidence that what we need is dedicated treatment programs that have that psychoeducational component, that are led by survivors themselves, so that we have those insights that then we can empathize with that that's being expressed by survivors, and which creates that mutually supportive and empowering environment in which people can move forward agentically with their recovery. And so I think that, Kate, your model is making and will make a real contribution to the ability of survivors to move forward. And I'm so pleased to be able to comment on some of that with you today.
Thank you so much, Rod. I appreciate it. So I saved this bit till the end because I never know when I tell a story whether I'm going to get choked up or not. So I just wanted to describe and explain where I came to the idea of the psychosocial quicksand. And it occurred one night. I had just found out that the county attorney's office was going to be dismissing the protective order violation case against my ex-husband, who had assaulted me previously on multiple occasions. And they were not going to be moving forward with that case. And I had waited for almost 3 years for that case to be tried. And my hope was that I would be receiving a lifetime protective order as an outcome of that case. And in the middle of the night, I woke up, it was probably around 2 or 3 a.m. And for at least an hour, I was My heart was racing. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was being suffocated and strangled. I felt like I was being squeezed and that the life was being squeezed out of me. And after about an hour of feeling like that, the thought came to me, oh, this must be what it's like to die in quicksand. And that is where the idea came from. And when I interviewed the folks for my research, I was grateful to have to be able to hear the stories that they shared spontaneously, that to find that the model that I had created had an impact for them. And my hope is that as I use it for training professionals, that it will have an impact for them as well, because the intent of the model is to help fill these systemic gaps that survivors are experiencing, where they're getting let down by the system. And I don't mean to imply that professionals in the system are doing that on purpose, or that everyone in the system is doing that. That's not the case. There are plenty of professionals that are doing a phenomenal job and that stand up for survivors day in and day out and deal with their own secondary trauma because of that. But for the places where gaps exist, my hope is that the model can make an impact there. So this slide has our email addresses. If you'd like to contact either of us, please feel free. You can also go to my website. I have a resources page. I have a research page. It would be at endccusa.com. And you can also book a free consultation if you are in need of expert witness testimony or a coercive control assessment on your case. And so for now, what we will do is move into the Q&A section. And it's going to look like Rod and I changed clothes because we're going to be doing that part live. But thank you so much for coming. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, Rod, before we go?
Well, thank you so much, Kate, and indeed for what you said at the end there. That's really so powerful, as the model overall. So, just my pleasure and privilege to be with you today and to have supervised your work. So, thank you so much, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.